Welcome to Arise America. I'm Duarte Geraldino. We begin tonight with an earth-shattering reshuffling within the Trump cabinet. The president fired Secretary of State Rex Tillerson not face-to-face, but instead via Twitter. Now, for months, Washington insiders have been hinting at discord between the two men. Trump announced CIA Director Mike Pompeo will be the new Secretary of State. This is Mike Pompeo. And Gina Haspel will be promoted and has become the first woman to head the Central Intelligence Agency. The president expressed his confidence with the new leadership shuffle.
I'm really at a point where we're getting very close to having the cabinet and other things that I want. But I think Mike Pompeo will be a truly great Secretary of State. I have total confidence in him. And as far as Rex Tillerson is concerned, I very much appreciate his commitment and his service, and I wish him well. He's a good man.
Tillerson's dismissal marks the departure of a second senior-level cabinet member within a week. So what will this revolving door mean for U.S. diplomatic relations around the world? Our guest is a political scientist, Paul Celentano. He teaches at Lehman College, and he specializes in international relations. Welcome, Paul.
Nice to be here. Thank you. So
we saw what's going on. First of all, your initial reaction. Were you expecting this? Because some insiders say, well, we thought something might be going on.
Yeah,
what about you?
Yeah, I think for a very long time, this has sort of been the writing on the wall that, Tillerson was on his way out. Especially since he's taken stances against Donald Trump on a number of issues over the last little more than a year. And the tension sort of seemed to be building from the very beginning, from the summer with, tweets where Trump was actually apparently it was reported that Tillerson was calling Trump a moron in a meeting. So there was clearly tension from the very beginning, as well as various things where Trump, for example, seemed to contradict his Secretary of State Tillerson on a number of occasions. For example, on Qatar. Back in the summer as well, calling it a sponsor of terrorism, where Tillerson was very emphatic that they were an important ally of the United States. So
there was a lot of heat. You mentioned that moron comment, and I want to play you a brief interview where Tillerson actually responds to that. Take a listen to this.
I'm not going to deal with petty stuff like that. I mean, this is what I don't understand about Washington. Again, I'm not from this place, but the places I come from, we don't deal with that kind of petty nonsense. And it is intended to do nothing but divide people. And I'm just not going to be part of this effort to divide this administration.
So you heard his response about that moron comment. Obviously, this wasn't recent, but right after this, he didn't deny it. He just said he wouldn't respond to it.
This is true, yeah. I mean, this has sort of become, on some level, the hallmark of this administration, right, where there are constantly, comments about things happening behind closed doors and reports of things that are extremely embarrassing, but are often not really directly acknowledged for public relations reasons, obviously, because they obviously make Trump look bad. With discord within his own camp. Especially this comment was last summer, so it was pretty early on in the Secretary of State's tenure. So definitely problematic for sure.
So what is his ouster, his firing? What kind of implication does that have for U.S. international relations? I mean, this is your specialty.
Right. So it does seem that the level of instability that currently exists at the State Department is very problematic. It's an already understaffed department with the prospect of a 30% budget cut on the horizon. There are key positions that haven't been filled, like in South Korea. There's no ambassador to South Korea. The ambassador to Mexico recently said that they were going to be leaving. There have been some key departures, like Elizabeth Shackelford back in December, who was considered sort of a rising star in the State Department, leaving. So, at the same time as you have this brain drain, you now have instability at the highest levels of the State Department, which, brings with it questions of, who speaks for the president? Does Mike Pompeo, who's now stepping into this role, does he speak for the president? Because for the longest time, it seemed as if Tillerson had difficulty with the president not publicly supporting him. undermining his ability to actually do his job. When he would meet with foreign leaders, would they believe that he was the final authority on the things, on the promises that were coming out of his mouth to foreign leaders? And it's obviously problematic when you go overseas as the nation's head of the State Department, and allies, especially allies, don't even necessarily know if there's going to be a tweet later in the day contradicting what you told them. So,
with this new head, Pompeo, do you think that he will actually bring more stability, or do you think it's going to be more of a yes game?
So that's a little bit difficult to answer, because on one hand, there should be more stability in the sense that Pompeo and Trump seem to see eye to eye on a lot of issues. For example, whereas Tillerson and Trump made contradictory statements about the Iran deal, Pompeo has, in the past has made statements saying that he was sort of in line with the president, that, there were definitely questions if he wanted to support it as well. So on some level, you may have a more coherent policy, maybe a little bit less haphazardness, but is that necessarily a good thing? It's kind of an open question, because...
So I want to stress that. You say maybe more coherent, but not as haphazard.
Yeah, if we're lucky, maybe. If Pompeo is lucky, maybe he won't have tweets coming out later in the day that contradict public statements he makes, unlike Tillerson. But, on the other hand, is a united policy that, is coming from Mike Pompeo, who has never served as a diplomat. He served on a number of subcommittees in Congress, but for the most part, they focused on energy and intelligence. And and there has been some talk of stressing his ability, his past meetings with important people around the world as head of the CIA. But that's not exactly the same thing as meeting with these people in the capacity of Secretary of State. So it'll be interesting to see sort of how he goes about managing these relationships.
All this comes right before the U.S. is preparing for what's really a historic meeting with the North Korean leader. Do you think that Pompeo is better suited for that?
Yeah, so this transition, it's interesting because actually, theoretically, Tillerson is supposed to be staying in his job until March 31st, when the Deputy Secretary of State will then take over, who himself has actually been, a government official for quite a while now under a number of presidents, but, is also, as of a little over a year ago, a newcomer to the State Department. Yeah. So, as of March 31st, he'll be taking over, and then the hearing to confirm Mike Pompeo, who's not officially the Secretary of State till he's confirmed, it'll be interesting to see how the next month and a half or so are managed, because you might have a different person who, is acting as Secretary of State than the one who's actually responsible for aiding the president with North Korea in May. Not to mention other things that are supposed to be happening, such as around that same time meetings with Middle East leaders as well, from Saudi Arabia, among others, and dealing with a number of issues that previously Tillerson had disagreed with Trump on. So it should be interesting now that Mike Pompeo and Trump see eye to eye, but when that power actually gets passed over and how long the confirmation takes will be very significant, I think.
If we could take the broad view for a second, what should the American public make of all these reshuffling? Is this a time for us to feel more secure or less secure in the way that our government is handling our place in the world?
I think that it's probably less secure on some level, but anytime you have instability, there's always uncertainty is always a problem, right? Like, nations generally like predictability. They like to know. They like the United States to telegraph what it's going to do, because it makes it easier for them to actually plan their policy with the United States, and the devil you know better than the devil you don't, kind of thing. So in that regard, I think that clearly this sort of instability and constant reshuffling is problematic. Also, Tillerson, albeit he had never served in the State Department previously, but at least was not so much considered an insider, but had the support of some insiders. He was actually recommended by former Secretaries Gates and Condoleezza Rice. So he at least had some sort of general acknowledgement that he might be up for the job. It'll be interesting to see if Mike Pompeo is, however, just because he lacks that necessarily kind of endorsement from people who have previously held similar positions.
When we talk about Tillerson, we know that he's had a lot of international experience, even though not in the political sense, but still, he met with world leaders before he had been endorsed, but also he had some connections to Putin. Do you think that may have played a role in his now firing?
that is extremely hard to say, because I think that a lot of the relationship between Tillerson and Putin, I'm sure, was kind of more behind closed doors in terms of its actual substance.
More closed doors.
Yeah, of course. I mean, you know, Tillerson was an oil guy, obviously, having been CEO over at Exxon. So it sort of made sense he would have relationships with various countries who were, you know, who you know, were oil-producing countries. But yes, I mean, I do think that it's very likely that the relationship with Russia could change. However, it's notable that Tillerson actually, while he acknowledged the potential meddling in the election by the Russians, obviously, as you say, with the relationship with Putin, Pompeo was more silent on that, even though he was head of the CIA. So it will be interesting to see how the president, who seems to see eye to eye potentially on Russian meddling with his new Secretary of State, what sort of the new or continuation of policy toward Russia will be as well.
That's the main question. Thank you so much, Paul Celentano,
Thank you,
political scientist.